that no longer have their head coach. Would the committee even want to take those teams there in that situation, especially if they have a choice to take something different? So now the doors may be swinging back in the direction of not just Alabama, but maybe Ohio State there as well, that you got to find 4 teams you can take for the playoff, and there could be a little bit of a distaste on the part of the committee by taking teams that don't have head coaches. So it's going to be crazy. It's obviously probably been the craziest, week of college football news we've maybe ever even seen, and the way in which all of this now impacts the college football playoff. We haven't even got to championship week yet. I think that gets pretty crazy there more. Kapaga over on the comment section says, does Jaden Hazelwood and Zach Evans look at Georgia? I would say the chances of Hazelwood are greater than the chances of Zach Evans right now. I just think that Georgia's been down the Evans road before. I think that the Hazelwood thing is probably worth paying close attention to. Mike Hughes says, I don't want Hazelwood. I can't go with you there, Mike. I'm not saying that I don't like what Georgia has at receiver, but Hazelwood's a big-time talent, and if Georgia had a chance to get him, I guess I probably would look pretty closely at that. Heather Capallo also asking about how Brian Kelly's going to handle the culture there in Louisiana. It is very different. And, I think that Brian Kelly's a proven winner. I think this is a big-time hire for LSU. I think it makes Florida look weak by comparison. But even for a guy like Kelly, who's a proven winner, at a place like LSU, he's still only going to be as good as the staff that he puts together. He's going to have some guys on that staff that understand that SEC culture. And the LSU culture is probably a little bit of a world apart from most of the rest of the SEC there, too. It's just even a little bit different brew on all that there as well. It's a pretty intense place. You see the way in which guys win championships there. They flame out pretty quick. It's kind of a wild place to be a coach, and Kelly does not strike me as a wild guy. So finding out how comfortable he gets in a situation like that, I think is going to be, pretty interesting to watch. Jermaine King says Pickens might beg Kirby to go after Hazelwood. Yeah, obviously my expectation is that George Pickens may move on after this year is done. But can you imagine if it really does finally come to fruition that George Pickens and Jaden Hazelwood could play in the same offense as a lot of Georgia fans at one point in time would have dreamed of? I think that's pretty interesting. Jesse S., going back to the Kelly thing, says it could be a dangerous combination. He's a structured guy and a solid recruiter, plus he's walking into one of the most talented rosters in the country. And that's probably the sole reason why he's taking this job. Brian Kelly's 60 years old, and he's done about everything that you can do with the exception of winning a national championship. And he just can't do it at Notre Dame. Notre Dame just simply can't win a national championship. It could have made the playoff again this year, but I think you know all you need to know about the chances that Notre Dame could win once it got there by the fact that Brian Kelly's not sticking around for that. He just simply knows it's not possible. Notre Dame just does not compete at the highest level for the elite talent. Notre Dame has more talent than most teams in the country do, but nowhere near as much talent as the best teams in the country do. So it's not, from that standpoint, a crazy thing that someone like Brian Kelly would want to find out, well, how can I perform at a place where there are no restrictions on getting talent? You've got the geographic advantage. You've got the recent history on your side there. Obviously, LSU and Notre Dame, a little bit different kind of academic institutions. You've got a lot of these things now going for you in a way you didn't have at Notre Dame. Can I come down here and can I win at the highest level here? It's maybe not a surprise from that standpoint that Brian Kelly wants to test himself, obviously in the best league. And you're also seeing two very different coaches here. The dominance of the SEC is the unspoken subtext to everything that's happened in college football over the course of the last few days. And you've got some coaches, Lincoln Riley, who want to run away from it. You've got some coaches, Brian Kelly, who want to run towards it. And I think it tells you a lot about Kelly in comparison to Lincoln Riley. For Lincoln Riley, what matters to him as a young guy is job security. This is a guy that's afraid of getting blown out. This is both maybe on the field, but also eventually in terms of his position. Staying far away from the SEC, going out to be a big fish in a small pond, which is what the West Coast is from a college football standpoint right now. That just suits him better at this station of his life. He's, I think it's just fair to say, scared of what happened to him in the SEC. Whereas Brian Kelly can say, hey, I'm about to retire pretty soon anyway. Either this works or it doesn't. But he thinks that his legacy is firmly established. And to be honest with you, he's won a lot of games. He's won 200-something games. That's a hard thing to do over the course of the time that he's been coaching. So, I think from that standpoint, you got to give him a lot of credit. Oh, yeah, also Sam Robards mentioned the fact that Mike Bobo is now out at Auburn. That's another thing you got to mention here today. He says, where do you think he'll end up after being fired from Auburn? I don't know. Would I imagine there's a lot of phone calls going on, either in an official or unofficial capacity between he and Kirby Smart this week about the upcoming game against Alabama? I would say there's a chance that's probably true. Does that mean anything for Bobo's future? I would say probably not. Mike's a young enough guy that he's going to have plenty of opportunities to coach. Now, I think that, he's obviously had a little bit of issue there at South Carolina, a little bit of an issue, there at Auburn, and it's, difficult to know how much of that's personnel related, how much of that was a personality fit, him working with Brian Harsin. I'm sure that Bobo is going to have some things to say about all of that. I continue to believe, though, that Mike Bobo is a really sharp offensive mind, and I think it's just a matter of him kind of finding the place where he can be comfortable again. I mean, I think Mike Bobo is a top-shelf, high-level offensive coordinator. It hasn't quite worked out for him at South Carolina, but that was a weird situation where Will Muschamp was kind of on the last legs of his coaching tenure. Hasn't really kind of worked out for him there at Auburn, but once again, that's kind of a weird situation all around there too. So I still am of the belief that Mike Bobo is a sharp offensive coaching mind. I think he should be in demand as an offensive coordinator. I think that he, bet on a couple of weird situations that didn't quite work out. Cam Hasty on the subject of Alabama being a little bit one-dimensional in the running back spot. Yeah, that's kind of an issue right now. They are really pretty thin right there. I think it speaks to this not being as strong of an Alabama roster as we're used to seeing. The fact that they are now thinner at running back than you're kind of used to seeing them be. So we'll take more of your comments. We kind of roll on here. Are we on the other platforms now? All right, so we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitter. We're glad to have all of you with us here. Twitch there as well. So it's Connor Riley. It's a Kroger Fresh Take with him. We'll remind you about the big event coming up on Thursday at Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Hope to see all of you there for that. We'll talk about all the wildness that is a just crazy, crazy week on the coaching front and how that impacts Georgia, both in the near term, what the college football playoff might look like, in the long term, the fact that Georgia kind of gets to sit back and watch the hysteria unfold all around them. But to begin with, very different coaching situations right now for Kirby Smart at Georgia, for Nick Saban in Alabama. And I think this tells us something about the approach these guys are taking coming into the SEC championship. And it might even tell us what ultimately happens in the SEC championship. We'll talk more about why. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So I think when it comes to building a winner in college football, some of this is about science and some of this is more of an art. The science is you got to have great players, and you've got to have a proven system for attracting those players, how you stay in contact with them, how you make your pitch to them. Like, the recruiting is the name of the game. Everything about the way in which the coaching carousel is spinning right now is all related to recruiting. We just kind of understand that that's the science of college football, that there is a certain caliber of athlete you have to have, and there is a certain mechanism for how you attract those athletes. The best programs figure this out. The mediocre to midland programs kind of somehow don't figure that out, and that's the clear difference in college football. However, let's talk for a moment about the programs that are exclusively in the category of elite talent, the kinds of programs that can win a national championship. Let's just put all of those in the same category for a moment. I think when you get into that exclusive category alone, I think it becomes college football a little bit less about the science of, hey, you got to attract the elite talent. That's the end-all, be-all. That's been proven over and over again. To now you bring some of the art into it, where different coaches are going to have a different spin on how they get their teams ready to play. And some of this is from an X's and O standpoint. Some of this is, kind of related to that scheme and whatnot. But some of this is also just related to motivation. And I've always felt like that Georgia coach Kirby Smart was really good at kind of what I think of as the invisible part of college football, that he just seems to know how to motivate his team. He seems to know what they need at any given moment. And Smart said this a million times before. you can't always be fully like redline. Like the great speech that he gave at halftime of the Florida game that became a leaked audio clip that so many folks have heard. And it's kind of funny because Smart's, almost cartoonishly profane in the clip that was shared. But it's also like this incredibly intense, like 12 on a scale of 1 to 10 level of intensity. And Smart found that and used that at halftime of a big rivalry game. But you can't be that way all the time. We kind of understand that. We talked to John Stinchcomb about this yesterday, and I thought John had some really interesting things to say about that, about kind of how you approach the level of motivation that you need for your team going to a game like the one that Georgia's going to play on Saturday. Now, conversely, the same thing's kind of true for Alabama coach Nick Saban there as well. Now, Saban is also one of these famously intense guys, whether Kirby Smart learned that from Nick Saban or whether Nick Saban was attracted to Kirby Smart because he also genuinely had some of that. We know that those times spent around Alabama when Nick Saban had Kirby Smart as his defensive coordinator, this was a very intense time for the Alabama program. Our buddy Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American that for years I worked with on SEC Country Live, who, by the way, is going to be with us on SEC Country Live for the full show tomorrow. He's talked about that, those private behind-the-scenes stories of just how intense it was being around Nick Saban. That was the level of motivation that he chose to employ. He selected the kind of players that could handle that intensity, and he pushed them to be even more intense they thought they could possibly be, and that was just the way that Alabama achieved success. However, I think you can't help but notice, going into this year's SEC championship, that the two coaches that are going to coach in this game, Kirby Smart on the Georgia side, Nick Saban on the Alabama side, I think you can't help but notice that right now they are taking very different approaches to the game. One of the things that made me realize this was, so on Saturday, Georgia Tech concluded. We did the post-game show, and then we were getting out of there. And I'm pretty tired usually on Saturday afternoons. A lot of folks, kind of are. And so I'm getting ready to head home, but then my wife said that she and the kids were going to be doing something, so the house was kind of empty. And so I thought, well, I'm hungry. This Iron Bowl game is going on, so let me swing into a restaurant and let me, get a little bit to eat, and I'll watch the end of the Iron Bowl. And so I did, and, obviously it was a thrilling game. I was really entertained by it. But then at the end, so Nick Saban gets interviewed by Jamie Erdahl, the CBS sideline reporter, and it was really amazing to see that interview about how happy Nick Saban was. And, he's just so thrilled. And, to a lot of people, his team had eked out a win against an Auburn team that had been blown out by Georgia and had just lost the previous week to South Carolina. But Saban just had this big smile on his face. Now, it's almost like a bigger smile you would have seen on his face than some of the championship-type wins that Saban would have gotten in previous years. And when you really think about that and you put that into the rest of the context of some of the things that Saban's been saying lately, I think you see a really different version of his motivational ploys for his team right now compared to the way that Georgia coach Kirby Smart is motivating his team ahead of its also attempt at a championship run here. And it's not, it's not possible to know right now which of these two tacks is going to end up being the most successful, which is going to result in a win on Saturday, nor is it obvious that one of these motivational ploys will necessarily be the reason why one of these teams wins or loses coming up on Saturday. But nonetheless, it is still remarkable how different both these coaches are talking about their team right now. Now, I could have played 5 minutes worth of clips for you on this, but in a way of kind of like trying to back up the point I'm making, I selected a handful here. This is about, 45 seconds or so of a little bit of Smart and a little bit of Saban. And here's what you're going to hear when you hear this. Smart, the hard-driving coach, pushing for more and more success, putting a very high standard up for his team, and talking about all the ways in which, even in the midst of blowout wins and dominant season, in Smart's eyes, they're not achieving that. The players themselves apparently agreeing with Kirby Smart, whereas Nick Saban's just passing out gold stars all over the place, participation trophies left and right. And as I said before, I don't want to make too much out of small clips, but it is really pretty amazing how different all of this is right now. So here's a montage of the two coaches combined together. This all within the last 3 or so weeks. Take a listen to these two coaches, Kirby and Saban, right now.
I thought we started out kind of sloppy today. A little bit of a lack of focus early, especially on defense.
You could say it's not fair to our players that they get everybody's best game, but they do.
Offensively, it took us a while to get going.
I mean, do you want me to be critical of my team because we had to pump once in the first quarter and they got a field goal?
Can't do that and be a good defense. Can't be selfish.
I'm not going to be critical of anything that our players did when we win 59-3.
We go back and watch the tape, we'll find guys that maybe didn't do their job.
When I came here, everybody was happy to win a game. All right, now we're not happy to win a game anymore. We're not happy to win a game at all. All right, we think we should win games by whatever. And I don't think that's fair to the players either.
It was addressed in the locker room after the game, and some of those guys stood up and didn't feel like it was our best effort.
I mean, can you make? I mean, isn't that a remarkable? Isn't that a remarkable contrast here for a moment? That Kirby Smart, and a lot of that was taken from the Missouri game where Georgia won 40-something to 6, whatever the final score was that day. And Kirby Smart talking about the players not feeling like the defense was up to the standard, that the offense started out a little sloppy, and on you go there. In what has been a series of blowout wins, Kirby Smart has talked openly about the need to achieve that standard regardless of what the score is and regardless of what's happening there with his team. Whereas conversely, Nick Saban, after was it New Mexico State they played the other day, where it's like, hey, I'm not going to complain about our team just because we had to punt once, or I'm not going to tell these guys that they did something bad in a game that we won easily, or the rant before Thanksgiving with his coach's show where he was talking about how basically self-absorbed the Alabama fans have gotten. I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I think to the person that doesn't follow college football all that closely, I think one of the things you might take from that is, well, maybe Nick Saban really likes his team right now. Maybe Kirby Smart's trying to push his team even harder. But the folks who are really paying close attention to this, I think, know the opposite is true. I think Kirby Smart is having a blast coaching his team right now. I think that Kirby Smart is enjoying every minute of this. Smart really is like Saban in that they are process-oriented people. They're not results-oriented people, that they really do enjoy the day-to-day grind. And there's so many moments during this season where Kirby has talked openly about the way in which the leaders are setting the standard and just things like that lead you to believe that he really is enjoying all of this, that everything he's asking this team to do, they are responding to it immediately, and they are pushing themselves to be, from an intrinsic standpoint, as good as Smart wants them to be as a kind of an exterior form of motivation. It seems pretty obvious that this team is in sync with all of that, what Kirby wants from them, what the players want from themselves, and it's easier to imagine the players, the coaches themselves are very much enjoying this right now. But doesn't Nick Saban sort of sound a little bit more detached? And listen, this is not my way of saying, and this just goes to show you that it's going to be easy for Georgia on Saturday in the SEC Championship. We'll talk more about that in a moment. That no, I don't quite think it's necessarily going to be easy no matter what. But one of the reasons why a lot of Georgia fans do feel confident going into Saturday, one of the reasons why a lot of Georgia fans do believe that this is the year in which Georgia gets over that Alabama hump and goes on its way towards winning a national championship, is the level of resignation they kind of hear in Nick Saban's voice there. This is a team that's just simply not responding to his message very well. The way in which we've seen in the past, Alabama kind of plays that September game sometimes a little closer than it's supposed to be. Nick Saban flips out about that, and they go on this big run. That never happened this year. We talked about this back when Alabama played Florida. I said, listen, this is around the spot every year when Alabama plays a game a little closer than it's supposed to be. Would not surprise me if the Florida game was that. Well, guess what it was? But what did surprise me was in the aftermath of that, on the heels of that, there was no flip of the switch. I mean, look at the common opponents here. Look at the way in which Alabama played Florida closely. Georgia blew them out. Alabama played Arkansas closely. Georgia shut them out. The Auburn game, the other example of that. The Tennessee game was a little bit of a wash, there for both sides. But the point here is that way in which that Kirby Smart has seen his team respond to the high standard that he wants to set for the program. I think Nick Saban knows this Alabama team is just simply not capable of doing that. And so he's turned his attention to being like the most positive version of himself he can possibly be. And is there a chance that works on Saturday, making them relaxed, telling them to go out there and have fun and just enjoy it and not take it too seriously or whatever it is he's saying? Yeah, there's a chance that probably works. I mean, that's a motivational ploy that could work. Taking a team that's, a little substandard compared to Alabama's past and just telling them to relax and make the most of the moment, there's a chance that works. But this is not the way Nick Saban wants to coach. This is not the kind of team he wants to coach. We said this yesterday, that Nick Saban made a lot of deals to get the explosive offense he's enjoyed the last couple of years. There is no free lunch in life. that when you get better in one area, you are taking focus away from another area, and there's going to be some erosion there. So, yeah, Nick Saban's had the great wide receivers. He had the great quarterback play. He's had all of that. He's had the explosive offense. But there is a trade-off for that. Somehow, some way, every team that's tried this, every team that's moved in that direction has seen a loss of physicality. They've seen a loss of that intense edge for the program. And Alabama doesn't have it. They don't have it in the offensive line right now, don't have it in the running game, don't have it in the defense. And so all of a sudden now, when you want to push your team to go out there and finally dominate an opponent, this Alabama team hasn't been capable of doing that. So as I said before, I don't know what it means for Saturday's game. I think it's still tough for Georgia against Alabama. But there's a reason that Georgia fans are confident. It's the way both these coaches are talking about their teams that adds to that confidence. Kirby feels good enough about his team that he can push them harder and harder and harder, even when they're blowing teams out, because he thinks they can handle it. Nick Saban also talks to his team the way in which he thinks they can handle it there as well. And the fact that he's kind of gone a little soft, the fact that he's kind of gotten a little bit of a kinder version of himself here late in his career, I think that tells you what he thinks Alabama can handle. And that is also, I believe, a clue for how this game's going to turn out on Saturday. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us no matter how you get to us today. And a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making this show possible. It's 9:45 for our First and 15, which starts on DawgNation.com or the DawgNation app, or on video at 10, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all those video platforms, radio, noon, App and Sports Radio 960, The Ref, podcast, and all the various podcast players, the Apple Player, Spotify, all those terrific podcast platforms there as well. Just really appreciate you being a part of it today. And as we said before, it would not be possible. This great studio, these technological things that allow us to reach so many people, we couldn't do it without our friends at ESOG, Engineered Solutions of Georgia, the ones you turn to for your foundation and waterproofing issues. And listen, as a homeowner, those are serious things to consider, because it's the kind of thing that when you see that first sign of damage, you know that there's even more damage potentially on the horizon there. And that's why I invite you to check out Engineered Solutions of Georgia today. First of all, they're proud partners of UGA, and it's always fun to do business with those that support the Dogs. We encourage you to do that. But also, they've been longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily there as well. And certainly, I want to offer a sincere thanks to all of you that support folks like ESOG that help us keep the lights on here around DawgNation Daily there, too. And the other thing about ESOG is these are smart people, solutions-based company when it comes to problems you may have with your foundation and waterproofing. You know, Engineered Solutions of Georgia has 2 full-time engineers on staff. So they understand how all of this stuff potentially impacts the structural integrity of your home. So make a smart decision. Reach out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They've made it very easy for you to do so. Simply dial this number, 678-ESOG now. That's right, dial 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We've got a lot to do today on the program. Let me also make you aware of this. We're just a couple of days away from the big Chase for the Championship event taking place at the Marlows in Brookhaven at 6 p.m. on Thursday. This is going to be a huge event because it's our first time back at Marlowe's Tavern in quite some time. Jeff Santel's going to be there. Connor Riley's going to be there. Our buddy John Stinchcomb is going to be there. I'm going to be there. But most importantly, you have a chance to be there as well. So we invite you to do that. 6 p.m., Marlowe's in Brookhaven. We're going to have great chef-inspired food, all the delicious craft cocktails and all the things like that they're making for you. Our friends at Classic City Lager are going to be on hand there as well. So that's going to be flowing there on Thursday night. It's just going to be a great time. We'll do kind of an off-air meet and greet Q&A where we'll talk about some of the inside stuff for the SEC Championship, some recruiting stuff going on there as well. And then obviously we'll be live broadcast there too, which you can be a part of, and we're certainly glad to have you with us as we do that. So it all goes down Marlowe's in Brookhaven on Thursday, 6 p.m. Marlowe's in Brookhaven on Thursday. You can check out marlowstavern.com for more information, including how you can be there. But Marlowe's in Brookhaven on Thursday, 6 p.m. for all of that. All right. So it's Connor Riley coming up. We'll do a Kroger Fresh Take with him. We'll talk a lot more about everything in the lead up to the SEC Championship. Big day coming up for the Dogs on Saturday. It's a game that admittedly I feel good about on the Georgia side of this, and I am a Georgia fan. I do the show from the perspective of a Georgia fan. But I guess there is one thing that I'm going to stop short of saying. In fact, I want to make that the subject of Around the Doghouse, presented today by Georgia's own credit union, before we get to Connor Riley here in a moment. So here is the way that sports media works. And this is true for podcast, streaming, internet, old school media, kind of whatever you want to get to. That there is such a need for content leading into a big game like Saturday that it can be pretty easy to feel like middle of the week, that pretty much everything that can be said that needs to be said has already been said. So folks are going to kind of weigh in on the Georgia-Alabama thing. Like, I've heard some Alabama predictions. I haven't heard a lot of Alabama predictions, and do with that what you will, but I am hearing a lot of folks picking the Dogs. And so at a certain point, for the content creators out there, whether it be, podcast hosts, streaming video hosts, social media, gadfly, whatever else, there's this need to kind of up the ante on that, where, hey, I no longer get attention for simply picking Georgia to win. Now I've got to pick Georgia to win by a wide margin. Now that's what I've got to do. And look, there's a chance on Saturday that Georgia does win this game by a wide margin. Georgia's clearly, on a week-to-week basis, been much better than Alabama all season long. But the one thing that I'm not going to do this week is I'm not going to pick Georgia to win this game in some sort of blowout fashion, even though they might do it. I'm not going to do that. Here's one of the things that does matter to me, that I think when you look at a long-standing precedent on something, I think you're left to conclude that it must mean something. And one of the things that we just don't really see much of is, Alabama occasionally loses. But the one thing I think you have to say is they don't lose by double-digit points very frequently. And that's at least worth considering. For instance, this year they lost to Texas A&M, but they only lost by 3 points. Didn't lose at all in 2020, but go back to 2019, a year in which they lost Auburn by 3 points, lost LSU by 5 points. Like, the one blowout game that you kind of point to is when they lost the national championship game in 2018 to Clemson, lost that game by 29 points. That's like the one blowout that Alabama kind of has on its resume, in the Nick Saban era. Year before that, in 2017, did lose to Auburn by 12 points. But you're talking about 2 losses of 10 or more points in 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 in the last 5 years. 2 losses of 10 or more points in the last 5 years. You want to go back and look at 2016 for a moment. Same thing's kind of true there. This is a team that's just kind of rolling right through the regular season. They did lose the national championship game to Clemson that year, but only lost by 4 points. Now you're talking about 2 double-digit point losses in the last 6 years. Go back to 2015 here for a moment. They lost by about a touchdown to Ole Miss there in 2015. Didn't lose again the rest of the season. Now you're talking about 2 double-digit point losses in the last 7 years. You can go back on, over and over again. This is an Alabama team that's going to go back multiple years and only have a small number of losses by 10 or more points. And so when you think about that as the track record, even though I think I would very much tell you this is not the same kind of Alabama team this year that some of those previous teams were, yet that recent history I think still matters to me in this game. It's one of those things where, hey, I may be pleasantly surprised on Saturday. Maybe Georgia does win this game by 14 or 17 points or something like that. Maybe that is the direction all this is heading. But I'm going to have enough respect for the game. I'm going to have enough respect for the opponent to assume that based on the recent track record for Georgia, based on the recent track record for Alabama, that if Georgia wins this game, it's probably going to be a hard-fought game to do so. It's probably going to be a game that's a little closer there at the end. And what that ends up meaning is, well, then everything in the game, every moment in the game is going to be just a little bit more magnified. And that's true. But I still think that you can kind of lean on what has made Georgia better all season long. That the longer a close game goes, the more dominant defense, the more efficient offense, the more those things do start to show up and start to matter. That over the course of 60 minutes, you hope the better team does truly emerge. And I think that's the pathway for Georgia. But the notion of, man, it's going to be easy. Georgia's going to win this game by, 3 or 4 touchdowns. That's a level of clout chasing that I just don't feel like it'd be appropriate for me to go after here right now. Do I think that Georgia win this game? Yes, I definitely do. Am I going to pick Georgia to win this game? Yes, I am. Am I going to tell all of you, and it's going to be easy, Georgia's going to win it walking away? That's not a prediction right now I am comfortable making. I expect it to be as close as some of the recent Alabama losses have been. History seems to be kind of on the side of that pick there right now. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union. And listen, as we head towards the holiday time of year, obviously everybody's talking about, what they're going to be doing to get ready for all those gifts that you have to buy. And this is one of the things that I want you to think about here. The experience of shopping for your holiday gifts made so much more convenient when you sign up for one of these Visa Signature and Platinum cards from my friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union. First of all, it's an incredibly convenient thing to have because they offer lots of cool things for you, like contactless payments. You don't want to, come in contact with anybody while you make your payment. That's what Georgia's Own Credit Union can provide for you with the Visa Signature and Platinum cards. They also have incredible incentives for you there as well. I'm talking about you get a chance to earn cash back. You get a chance to get some merchandise. You get all these cool things as an extra incentive when you get your Visa Signature and Platinum card. So make sure you check that out today. Find out about some restrictions that apply, but also apply for your card today. Check out georgiasown.org for a lot more on that. georgiasown.org for a lot more on that. Around the Doghouse, presented today to you by our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union. All right, it was an incredibly busy day from a news standpoint yesterday. We'll touch on a lot of this here coming up in a moment as Brian Kelly leaves Notre Dame, comes to LSU, and I think you can make a lot of very specific statements as an offshoot of that big news yesterday. So before we're done today, we'll get into all of that. Georgia also gets a commitment here. We're going to do some of that coming up, and just a whole bunch right now as we get a Kroger Fresh Take from our buddy Connor Riley, getting ready for the SEC Championship on Saturday, and glad to have you with us too.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here today. And I know Connor's got a lot to say as we get ready for the SEC Championship coming up on Saturday. And I guess, Connor, let me begin with you where I just was a moment ago. Alabama's lost some games. Every team eventually will. But Alabama doesn't lose in blowout fashion very frequently. They don't lose in double-digit fashion very frequently. So for the Georgia fan who wants to be, really confident on Saturday, I don't know that I can kind of meet him there on that. I expect Georgia to win, but I also expect it to be a hard-fought game. And I expect if Alabama does lose on Saturday, it looks like what most of their losses have looked like over the last half-decade plus. Do you agree with that?
I'd love to meet the Georgia fan that is so confident in this team that they don't see them losing to Alabama, just given the past history within these two teams.
Well, hold on. Let me stop you right there for a second. You don't sense a great deal of confidence among Georgia fans right now?
The Georgia fans I talk to don't. They just want to win. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter what the score is. The people that I know and I talk to, whether they win by 100 or win by 1, as long as they beat Alabama on Saturday, it's going to be a great day. Go ahead, your show.
I guess what I'm saying here about this is I think that there are some people that have determined that the clear advantages that Georgia has enjoyed all season long are, in comparison to Alabama, are going to really bubble up. And I just don't necessarily think that necessarily works its way out to the kind of thing where, we're popping, champagne bottles and smoking cigars there in the fourth quarter. My guess is Georgia has to fight for the full 60 in order to get the win.
Based on what you've seen, because you talk about past Alabama teams, what have you seen from this Alabama team that gives you the belief that this Alabama team is capable of keeping it close against this Georgia team?
It's two names. It's the quarterback and it's Will Anderson. I think that when you have, what I'm going to call superstar level players, I think they can bridge a lot of gaps. And if you want to start comparing the 22 guys going to be on the field the most, I think that Georgia has a huge advantage in almost every single one of those side-by-side comparisons. But if I have a guy like Anderson, I have great respect for him. If I've got a quarterback like Young, I've got a lot of respect for him there too. And if I'm thinking about how Alabama can do what it needs to do to give itself a chance to win this game in the final 5 minutes, then to me it's about Anderson, it's about Young, and maybe you can add Jameis Williams into that there as well, and you probably should. But it's that issue right there. It's what you do with Anderson, preventing him from sacking quarterbacks or even affecting quarterbacks. What you do to prevent a lot of Bryce Young quarterback runs and creating those opportunities for deep throws to a guy like Jameson Williams. That to me is the very simple recipe for Alabama keeps this game close enough so they can make a play to win it late.
Do you know how many Power 5 teams have given up more sacks than Georgia has this year?
How many?
0.
Yeah.
They are second in the country. Only Army has given up fewer sacks, and they throw the ball a whole lot less. Obviously Jamari Sawyer's status is worth watching in this game, But I've also been impressed with what I've seen from Broderick Jones, and I think Broderick Jones is the type of player that you go out and get as a recruit to play and have him ready to go in these type of games. He's gone on the road and played against Auburn. He's gone on the road and started against Tennessee. So, sure, Will Anderson is good, but I'd argue that what Will Anderson does well plays well into Broderick Jones' strength as a blocker, specifically as a pass blocker there. And I think, and I wrote about it this morning, I think the Georgia tight ends are going to have a really big game on Saturday, both attacking vertically those linebackers and safeties for Alabama, but also in their abilities as blockers. John Fitzpatrick is a name to know this week. Obviously, Brock Bowers, we understand what he can do as a pass catcher, but Darnell Washington is going to be asked to help out in the blocking game this week, and I think they can help slow that Alabama pass rush there. As far as Alabama on the offensive side, do you know how many healthy running backs Alabama has right now?
Yeah, it's like one right now, right? Yeah.
It is one.
And that's a guy that's been injured a lot.
And Trey Sanders is that running back. So if you want to go back and look at that Clemson game, if you just want to try and throw the ball 40 times a game on offense, that's going to make things really, really difficult. We even saw that a week ago when Alabama had to throw the ball 51 times to win in that game, and they only had 10 points at the end of regulation there. So that's not a recipe for success. And if you look back at those past Alabama-Georgia games, Alabama really won those games or kept it in those games because they were able to consistently run the ball. Look at both the 2018 national title game and the 2018 SEC championship game. And even last year, in the fourth quarter of that game against Georgia, they were able to run the ball successfully. That's not going to happen this year. And so I do think that does sort of extend Georgia's ability to make this a larger deficit.
The one thing I expect to happen, though, is I think that Alabama, at least in times when I've watched them this year, it seems like they were intentionally limiting Bryce Young's running plays because Alabama has no depth at the backup quarterback spot. There's no longer any need to limit that for Young because if he gets injured, they're going to lose anyway. I mean, but if you don't use him to the full extent that he can be used, I think you probably get beat also. So I think if they're going to really unleash Bryce Young, show what he can do from a running threat, I think a game like Georgia, the time you do that, because honestly, if I'm trying to game plan against this Georgia defense, I think a quarterback run probably works about as well as anything does because it gives you the extra blocker. To me, it seems easier to get away from the middle of the field, which is obviously where strength of this Georgia defense can be, especially when the big guy is in there. So if I'm, kind of imagining my own game plan against this Georgia defense, I think a quarterback run, maybe even setting up the occasional deep throw with that, that's probably what I would do there. And I'm guessing that maybe Bryce Young's Alabama's best running back on Saturday.
But Bryce Young is not a big guy, and if they're going to try and move him and use him in a quarterback run situation, are we sure we want him doing that when you have guys like Channing Tindall, Nakobe Dean, Nolan Smith, Trayvon Walker chasing him down and adding hits, given he's already going to probably take a lot of hits behind that leaky Alabama offensive line and the fact that this Georgia pass rush is the best pass rush that Alabama has seen so far this year. So they're going to have to be careful with how they use Bryce Young, especially with how much Kirby Smart has talked about him and Nick Saban. They use the word point guard. If you're a point guard and you're running around a whole lot out there and taking a lot of hits, Chris Paul has trouble staying healthy throughout the course of the season because he tries to drive into the paint and gets hit a lot. I think that's going to matter over the course of this game.
And I think we're going to find out, and I mentioned this with our video commenters yesterday, I think we're going to find out if does Bryce Young want to take these hits because, Jalen Hurts clearly would have. Hurts did not mind. He's a big, strong guy. He didn't mind taking the big hit there, and that obviously allowed him to be even more effective running quarterback. I think if Alabama's going to ask more from Young, or if he's facing a Georgia defense that's going to pressure him more than most of the defense Alabama's seen this season, we're going to learn a lot about Bryce Young, about how comfortable he even is, stepping into throws when someone like Channing Tindall is breathing down his neck, or extending for that extra yard, knowing that you're going to pay for doing so. Not every quarterback wants to do that. I don't know if we know yet if Bryce Young wants to do that, but on Saturday we're probably going to find out.
And you want to point to the last two times these two teams met in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Georgia had a great plan for their starting quarterbacks in both of those games. They kept Jalen Hurts from hurting them as a runner in the national title game, and they really limited what Tua Tagovailoa was able to do in that SEC championship game. Unfortunately, they flipped both those quarterbacks in their respective games, and I do think that made a big difference there. If Alabama has to turn to Paul Tyson or Jalen Milroe, they're in a lot of trouble in this game. And so because of that, I think they're going to have to be careful with how they want to use Bryce Young as a runner in this game.
You mentioned Brock Bowers. I also talked briefly about this yesterday. You look at Bowers from the beginning of the season, Obviously, a huge target in the Clemson game, and that really set the stage for everything that was going to happen after that. But he had no catches in the Arkansas game, and I'm not smart enough to know if that was because Georgia just knew it could run the ball that day against a Arkansas defense that didn't have a lot going on up front, or if Barry Odom, a smart defensive coordinator, kind of took Bowers out of the game plan for UGA there that day. I'd love to hear from somebody who would, say one way or the other. But I do think it does kind of shine a light on Saturday a little bit too. Bowers against Georgia Tech reminds you that he is just UGA's most effective pass-catching weapon. I think he's about the most effective pass-catching weapon that has existed in the Smart era, with apologies to maybe George Pickens going back to 2019 here for a moment. That's how good I think Brock Bowers is right now. But if I know that, Alabama also knows that there as well. And can Georgia still get the ball to Bowers on Saturday if that's what Alabama tries to key and take away? We always talk about playing left-handed, right-handed, doing something that makes you uncomfortable. Can Georgia find a way to get the ball to Bowers, or does it have a counterpunch in mind if Alabama does try to eliminate him as a weapon?
Yeah, as far as the Arkansas game, Georgia only had 11 pass attempts in that game, and they were up 21-0 at the end of the first quarter. They didn't need to throw the ball a whole lot there in that game. And if Alabama's going to play the same coverage that Arkansas did, Georgia's going to be content to run the ball for 5 yards a carry and sort of salt the game away that way. I do think this passing offense, this is the healthiest this wide receiver group has looked all season, and you've got a number of different options. Jermaine Burton was a guy they targeted a lot last year when they played at Alabama, and while he didn't have a great game in particular, he did find some success there that day. I look for him to be a guy that is going to have an impact on this game. I think Ladd McConkey, especially with the injury to Kearis Jackson, I think Ladd McConkey is a guy who can take advantage of Alabama there in the middle of the field. That seems to be where this weakness is with this Alabama secondary. And look, I'd point out, Zach Calzada did not have a very good year statistically. He had the game of his life against Alabama. KJ Jefferson couldn't do anything against this Georgia defense. He threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns against Alabama 2 weeks ago in Tuscaloosa. This Alabama passing off defense has shown that it is susceptible to not just good performances from quarterbacks that are just okay. They've had all-time great performances for those relative players. So would I be surprised if Stetson Bennett went out there and played a very, very good game against what is a very suspect Alabama pass defense? I would not.
Do you agree with what I said at the top of the program? I don't think Nick Saban likes his team very much.
I think he's learning. I think he knows he doesn't have the same quality of team in recent years and is trying to perhaps enjoy this and enjoy the smaller victories a little bit more than some of the past Alabama teams where he knows it's national championship or not there for Alabama. I think he knows, hey, it's still worth celebrating the getting to an SEC championship game, getting through the regular season 11-1. And I think maybe he even recognizes a little bit the destruction that he has waylaid to college football by solely focusing on SEC or national championships in that fact. I think the way that the SEC is now, where Ed Orgeron gets fired not even 2 years after winning a national title, where Dan Mullen is out less than 12 months after winning the SEC East, maybe he recognizes that that's not, and he's I think the single biggest reason why those two men are no longer employed at LSU in Florida, that kind of mindset, having it all the time, is incredibly toxic. And I think that even stems from the rant he sort of went on last week on his coach's call-in show, that if you're like that all the time, it can be so draining and exhausting when you don't happen to have the best team in the country, which I think we can say Georgia is this season. So maybe he's changing up his tactics and the way he is viewing things going forward.
By comparison, I think that Kirby Smart is loving coaching this team. I think there are a lot of examples of that. I think that he sees them responding to everything that he's pushed them to do, and I also think he sees a team that really, it's one of the reasons why we've done the hashtag JD thing so much, because Davis stands as the embodiment of all of this, but it's a team that has totally, I would say, bought into the team concept, and they've bought into the idea. I mean, Smart said this last week, the strength of the team is the team. That's not hollow words in this particular case. I believe that it's true, and it's one of the things that I've been pushing Georgia fans to notice right now. There is so much with this team, those of us that care about Georgia football, there's so much with this team that we're not privy to. But body language oftentimes is not going to lie to you. When you see the body language around Smart, the guy who is privy to it all, who is behind closed doors, you should take his lead on this. And you should, as a fan, try to have as much fun with this team as Smart himself seems to be having, because I can promise you, it is not always this way. You coach long enough, you're going to have teams you like and have teams you don't. Has Smart had teams in the past that maybe he didn't like? I don't know. I'll reserve judgment on saying that publicly. But in terms of what's happening with this team right now, no doubt I believe that Smart loves this team at the moment.
It's really strong leadership. Rivals maybe even potentially surpasses the leadership we saw on that 2017 team. And Smart has said time and time again, it comes from the players. Guys like Jordan Davis, Stetson Bennett, Jamari Sawyer, Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean. Those guys understand this team and know that it's sort of like those old Miami teams in the early 2000s and the way they talked about it. It said, yeah, Larry Coker wasn't a great coach, but we knew we were playing for each other and playing for a bigger cause. And I think this Georgia team and these Georgia players have that same sort of mindset, knowing that, hey, it's great that we have a great defensive coach in Kirby Smart. It's great that we have a very overqualified college offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. But we know at the end of the day, we're the ones out there making plays. We're the ones holding everyone else accountable. And if we do our jobs, it mitigates what these coaches have to do, and that's going to make winning on Saturdays a lot easier.
And here's the other thing I think you got to mention here, and I'll try to be succinct about this, is that I think that small differences can make a big impact. Like a lot of people look at Georgia right now and say, oh, well, this is the same version of Georgia we've become used to seeing under Kirby Smart. Really good on defense, good enough on offense, and that's the recipe that Georgia's going to try to use here. But what you miss by that is how much the defense actually evolved in the last couple of years. Georgia now is the kind of aggressive defense, going over 40-plus sacks against Georgia Tech on Saturday. That's after 12 games, more sacks than they've ever had, including a 15-game season back in 2017. Similarly on offense, you can say, well, this is still a team more led by defense than its offense, and that's probably true, but Georgia's also knocking on the door about 40 points per game that it's averaging right now. That's a small improvement over recent years that I think speaks to offensive growth to go along with a more impactful defense, that the overall caricature of Georgia football is still somewhat similar. Really good on defense, good enough offensively, but it's way better defensively than it was a couple of years ago, and its magnitude's better offensively than it was there as well. The profile looks the same, but the specific details on both sides of the ball are so improved. I don't know that the person that doesn't live and die with Georgia football, I don't know if they're quite so aware of just how true that really is.
Yeah, I've got a story coming on Thursday just about how different this Georgia team is from the last time they were in the SEC championship game and they lost by 27 LSU. And granted, that LSU team, one of the great teams of all time, I feel comfortable saying that. But this Georgia team is so much more modern and playing a much more 2020 style of football than, say, those 2017, 2018, and 2019 teams which are playing. And the game of college football has changed so much in that time. You need to be able to pressure the quarterback. The only teams that have more sacks this season are Oklahoma State, Pitt, and Alabama. And three of those top four teams are all contending for playoffs. Georgia, I believe, averaging over 7 yards per play. They are explosive in the passing game, even with the myriad of injuries they've had at the wide receiver position. You've shown that they're able to hit big plays in the running game as the season has progressed there. They are doing things that, well, it's a little different from what we've seen from Alabama and what we have seen from LSU in recent national championship seasons. They're doing enough their way while also still adhering to some of the modern principles that we all, I think, now acknowledge that you need to have to win a national championship.
All right, very quickly, do you see a team other than Alabama that has any chance of threatening Georgia at all right now?
I think if Michigan can pull – Michigan's really interesting because the one game where Georgia has struggled this year was that Clemson game, or at least it was a close game. And if you're a talented enough defense to pull the Georgia offense down into the muck, I think you can – have a close game and find enough ways to win it. Now, Michigan's going to have to throw the ball much better than they did against Ohio State because they're not going to run for 6 yards a carry against this Georgia front. But Cincinnati doesn't scare me. Oklahoma State, I watched all of that Bedlam game. It's great that they won it. If that Oklahoma team was more serious and maybe if Lincoln Riley didn't have his mind elsewhere during that game, Oklahoma probably should have won that game.
They also got jobbed by the officials a little bit too.
Yeah. And at the same point in time, that offense scored 0 points in the second half of that game. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame, I mean, I don't even know how you have them as a playoff team at this point, just given what Brian Kelly just did.
Right.
So
I'll also add this to what you're saying. I had at one point thought, the tough game for Georgia that's out there is Ohio State. Now the Buckeyes are seemingly eliminated. But watching what Michigan did to Ohio State, and I realized it was on the road and in the snow, I realized that. But all of a sudden now I'm starting to rethink, would have Ohio State even been a tough game for Georgia, given the fact that Michigan beat them doing a lot of the same things that Georgia would have done?
Exactly. And so you saw the pressures that they had in that game. I think Michigan, it'd be an interesting sort of style of fight, but at the same point in time, there's not a team as talented as Alabama among those other 3 playoff contenders at this point in time.
All right, let's do a couple things here very, very quick. It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here right now. I want to kind of bounce through some of this with you for a moment. So Georgia does get a commitment yesterday. I don't want to lose sight of this. Sean Washington, defensive lineman out of the state of Louisiana. It's a name that's been kind of on the, I guess, horizon here for a little while. You got any thoughts on Georgia adding this guy to the fold?
Yeah, Georgia dipping back into New Orleans, dipping back into Louisiana. I'm going to be really interested to see how Georgia continues to recruit the state of Louisiana, because they've done a pretty good job of that in recent seasons, and obviously have guys that have ties to that area, Cortez Hankton, Scott Cochran. But Florida hiring Billy Napier is going to make, I think, Florida more of a factor in the state of Louisiana. And then today, or last night today, it gets officially announced today, Brian Kelly getting hired at LSU. I'm going to be really interested to see how that does, because actually, sneakily, for all we say Notre Dame isn't, they were a top 5 recruiting team in this 2022 recruiting cycle. They were starting to get more, maybe not necessarily the top 100 guys, but guys in that 100 to 200 range that are still really good players, and more often than not develop into good players. You think of a guy like a Brock Bowers, a Channing Tindall in that range. So I'm going to be really interested to see how they go out and continue to recruit that. Defensive line is pretty clearly an issue that Georgia has targeted and really gone after in this cycle, given now they have Michael Williams, Big Bear Alexander, Tyree West at the moment, and then Sean Washington as well.
Yeah, I think the Tyree West thing is what I think gets interesting for a lot of people, and I totally acknowledge there's been tons of online chatter about this. That's a part of this discussion, but Washington's presence, what that means for West, I think that's going to lead a lot of people to ask some questions.
Right, and then you also have Christian Miller out there as well from Cedar Grove High School, a guy that Georgia has been very connected to in the recruiting process. So it's interesting, a lot of moving parts there for Georgia on the defensive line, but with Washington, with Williams and Alexander, who are now comfortably in this class, and if you add a Miller, even if you do lose a West, that's an awesome signing class for Trey Scott, who, even though they stand to lose a lot on the defensive line this year, that's about as good a job you can do as reload.
And one more quick thing on this, and I mean this as sincerely as one can. Even though Georgia recruits in the deepest waters of them all, there's not a Georgia fan left anymore that will flinch when this team signs a 3-star prospect, but because so many of them have turned out to be so good, whether it be the receiver guys or, obviously Jordan Davis, maybe the highest example of this at all, that if Georgia's targeting a guy, that really is all you need to know. And I know that kind of thing has been used as propaganda before of, the coaches really like this guy. I realize that's like the lamest message board propaganda you've ever heard in your life. But in the case of Georgia, it really has turned out to be true more often than not.
Right, and you look at some of those guys, Adonai Mitchell contributed early. Jordan Davis and Eric Stokes were both contributing early in their times at Georgia. Ladd McConkey this season as well there. So it's not just that they're identifying these guys and their long-term developments. A lot of these guys have shown they're able to play right now and play right away. A name I want to throw out there that's having a really great season, and you got a chance to see him earlier this year, Cole Spear. You know, that guy is a player. He's got a good body size. It would not, and while I know Georgia wants fans, they want the 4 stars, they want the high 5-star guys out there. I think with what you've seen from this Georgia passing offense and what they've been able to get out of lower-ranked guys, I think you have to trust what they see and what they evaluate in wide receivers.
I don't mind telling you that my thought about Spear would have been way different at one point in time in the past. I'm just going to be completely honest with you about that. I probably wouldn't have thought much about him one way or another, but because Georgia has had success with somewhat, below the highest level of recruit guys like that have performed on the program, I was more willing to consider him. And when I saw him play in person for Calhoun earlier this year, this is a really, really good athlete. He runs really well. You could absolutely see him fitting in the SEC. If Georgia's targeting a guy like this, he can probably play, regardless of what the recruiting ranking would say about that. That's a really good name to mention in a conversation like that. By the way, it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here right now, and Kroger is excited to offer Boost, which offers you more savings, more benefits, and a new level of membership with our friends at Kroger. You can enjoy free grocery delivery, twice the fuel points, and special offers there as well. It's as little as $59 a year, so check out Kroger.com/boost to enroll today. That website, once again, Kroger.com/boost, and you can enroll today. I'm going to talk more about this in a moment, Connor, but I'll give you a chance to weigh in on the big news from yesterday, capping off what might be the craziest week we've ever seen in college football, and I don't say that lightly. Brian Kelly taking what we assume is going to be a gigantic contract to leave Notre Dame to go to LSU. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, 10 years, $95 million is what has been put out by LSU. Incentives are going to push that end up over $100 million. And going back and reading some of the recent comments and picking through it, Brian Kelly was talking a lot about money, about figures, about wanting to improve facilities. And so my sort of reading of the green here is that, and Kelly, for everyone who wants to bash Notre Dame, Notre Dame has been one of the more dependable programs of the past in the college football playoff era. They are a Georgia win and either a Michigan, Cincinnati, or Oklahoma State loss from theoretically getting back into the playoff for a third time. He's done everything but win a national championship, and I think he senses that LSU, hey, their last 3 head coaches have won a national championship. I can go there, and that's a place I can contend. And he's shown he's able to recruit well enough there to do so. Obviously, it sucks that he may have very well just cost Notre Dame a chance at the college football playoff, because I don't know how the committee would feel about putting in a Notre Dame team with an interim coach in there. But Notre Dame, it sounded like Kelly wasn't getting the assurances. They stopped saying yes. And one of the things that I think you really have to credit Georgia for is that when Kirby Smart came in, they have had an open checkbook and they have said yes to everything. And to win in the modern college football era, more so than players, more so than recruits, more so than coaches, you need an administration that is committed to saying yes and getting you everything you need to win. And I think maybe Brian Kelly had sort of felt that he wasn't getting that at Notre Dame any longer, and felt that LSU has shown time and time again they are willing to do just that.
Yeah, Connor, it's fascinating stuff. And I mean, listen, as an SEC fan, it's fun to watch all of this. And as a Georgia fan, it's kind of fun to know that you're not really a part of that hysteria right now, but it's entertaining nonetheless. We appreciate you being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today, and look forward to reading, as you said, a lot more good stuff coming at DawgNation.com, and we'll see you Thursday. Chase for the Championship live at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. That's going to be fun, too.
Yep, looking forward to it. As always, a pleasure, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a lot about the Brian Kelly situation. There are a lot of offshoots about that as we go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. In fact, let me remind you, with our friends at Royal Caribbean, the cruise, DawgNation Cruise, is on sale right now. So went on sale for the first time yesterday. Independence of the Seas, leaving out of Port Canaveral. April 25th is the sale date. Going to be checking out Nassau, Perfect Day, Coco Cay. As I said before, the Great Ship, which is Independence of the Seas. This is going to be an incredible time, and obviously for something this big, this much fun, the time to kind of get ready for that is right now. So on sale, your cruise vacation's on sale right now. Just go to DawgNation.com, and right there at the top, there's a link that you can use to get to where you need to go for this. We really encourage you to go ahead and get all this booked right now. I'm going to be there. Mike Griffith's going to be there. Jeff Santel's going to be there. The possibility you have special guests are going to be there. We're going to have special DawgNation-only events for it. But the cruise itself is just going to be amazing. Independence of the Seas, Nassau, Bahamas, Perfect Day, Coco Cay. You've heard me talk a lot about that. This is going to be the biggest thing that DawgNation's ever done. We wanted to do that here for the upcoming year, and we get a chance to do this. So please check out DawgNation.com. Many of you have already said you plan on being there with us for that. I can't wait to just kind of relax and then finally enjoy a little bit of vacation. The fall is always so tough and challenging. I love every minute of it, but you burn the candle at both ends. So when it's over with, you need some sort of relaxation. You need some sort of rest. You need some sort of vacation to recharge the batteries. And the fact we get to all do that together on Independence of the Seas with our friends at Royal Caribbean makes that even better. So make sure you check that out today. So there is a lot to be said about Brian Kelly going to LSU. And I'm going to try to work my way through all of this here for a moment right now. Let's start with this. Do I think this is a good hire for LSU? I do. And let me tell you why. And Connor Raleigh kind of mentioned this a moment ago. Like, there is a clear level of achievement that that Notre Dame's not going to be able to achieve. Notre Dame's not going to be able to win a national championship. And there's a level of recruit that Notre Dame can't quite get. So there's a level above Notre Dame that they really can't aspire to. But if you look at the level below Notre Dame, they are doing quite well against what's beneath them. They got a long winning streak against unranked teams. Now, you may roll your eyes at that, but honestly, it's hard to go a long time without getting unbeaten. Notre Dame, for the most part, has been able to do that. The teams they lose to, when they face a Georgia or even a Cincinnati this year, team like that, they lose those games. But the other teams, for the most part, Notre Dame's kind of beating. I think that speaks to program strength. It speaks to stability, and Brian Kelly's going to have that there at LSU. There is a baseline level of achievement that you can assume for Kelly there at Notre Dame. It's one of the reasons why when Scott Woodward, the LSU athletic director, has made big coaching hires, it's one of the reasons why he's gone for the big names, not just in football, where he once hired Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M, but Kim Mulkey as a basketball coach or something like that. He has just gone after the really big name, because I think the first job of an athletic director is don't hire a disaster. And when you spend big bucks on a proven name, you at least know you don't have a disaster. Now, as far as the chance of winning a national championship in a very deep and competitive SEC, a lot of this is going to depend on who Kelly has on his staff with him. You can spend $100 million on the coach, but in a place like the SEC, it's what you have as a coordinator, especially for a guy like Kelly, who is going to be in a little bit of a culture shock coming to the SEC. Louisiana's a little bit of a league apart, even in that SEC culture world of its own. So a lot of that's going to be a little weird for Kelly, who's just not used to being in a conference and not used to a lot of those kinds of things. So his staff is going to matter here. But this is clearly a big-time hire for LSU. I think you can also look at Kelly in comparison to Lincoln Riley. There's no doubt that Lincoln Riley ran away from the chance to go to LSU because I think he was scared of the SEC. I think that's the reason why he left Oklahoma there as well. It's just easier to go out and be a big fish in a small pond, which is what the West is right now, the far west portion of our country. He didn't want any part of that. In Brian Kelly's case, he's older. He's near the end of his career anyway, so why not go to the biggest possible place you can go, most possible resources you can deploy, and try to win a national championship. I think it speaks to something that Kelly has in him that Lincoln Riley just doesn't have, and I think it's fair to point out that Lincoln Riley ran from the chance to play the sport at the highest level, and Brian Kelly did not do that. The other point that I've kind of made here is, Florida hires Billy Napier, and it's just completely been engulfed by this news, whether it be initially Lincoln Riley taking the USC job or now Brian Kelly coming into the SEC. And if you're a Florida fan, deep down you have to know that your program just doesn't play at this level. Whether they didn't want to spend the kind of money that would be required to bring in a Lincoln Riley or Brian Kelly, or they couldn't attract that kind of name right now. Or how about the fact of this? Brian Kelly leaves Notre Dame to go to LSU right now, even though that Notre Dame's got a chance to make the college football playoff. He still turned tail and run. Florida couldn't even get Billy Napier to leave Louisiana before the Sun Belt Championship game. I mean, that's the difference in the programs right now. LSU not only swung big, got the big coach, but they took him away from a chase for the college football playoff. Florida can't even convince Napier to leave the Sun Belt title game. That's a remarkable difference right now. Now, a few other things I want to say about this. It's obviously a little disappointing that, in the very least, Kelly's leaving before the playoff. If Notre Dame were to hire Luke Fickell, the Cincinnati coach, there's a chance that Fickell would also leave Cincinnati to start working, at Notre Dame. That's obviously disappointing, but I think it tells you two things. I think it tells you that, let's just deal with the one thing we know is true, that Kelly leaves Notre Dame to go to LSU. It tells you that Kelly is aware of what we're all aware of, is that Notre Dame was never winning the national championship. And if they were going to win the national championship, not only is Kelly maybe not leaving early for the LSU job, he may not even be leaving for LSU at all. This just sort of speaks to the theater that exists around the college football playoff, that the sport pretends that there are teams alive for a national championship that aren't truly alive for the national title, and they are given these token playoff spots at the expense of the SEC, and more than once that's probably been at the expense of Georgia. But in reality, those are not legitimate national championship contenders. And every time we see Notre Dame matched up in a college football playoff situation against a team that is going to win the national title, Notre Dame gets embarrassed every single time. That's just factually true. Brian Kelly knows it. That's why he's leaving. But here's the other thing that's going to get brought up, or at least I think it should be brought up. I haven't heard anyone else say this as of yet. All of this is motivated by the early signing period. We can change that. In other words, if the early signing period is creating this situation where the postseason is devalued because if you're moving to a new job, you can't afford to finish your old job, then we ought to look closely and say, well, is the early signing period really working out for college football? And I'm not saying this reason alone is enough to change it, but this reason may be enough of a reason to consider, is the early signing period working out for anybody? I mean, is it? Are the players themselves happier because of this? Because the way this was initially sold was the guys that don't want the recruiting drama can go ahead and sign in December, and we'll leave February for all the guys that do want that. But for the most part, the recruiting drama has just been moved up to December. We've taken what used to happen in February. For the most part, now all of that happens in December. So the initial plan of the early signing period hasn't quite worked out the way that it was supposed to. And if it's creating this scenario now where there's panic when you have to hire a new coach, then maybe we ought to consider the early signing period. And I guess I'll kind of finish with this on this point. everyone's going to make a big deal about all the money these coaches make and, the way in which they're moving around from jobs. And, this kind of creates that same – there are these radical forces that exist within the world of college football. A lot of this is in the media, and this just makes them very uncomfortable. The fact of the matter is there are a group of coaches at the highest end of the sport, the hierarchy, the top end of that hierarchy, and they are just worth a lot of money. Their presence changes the fortunes of a college football program in the way that an individual player just can't do. We do live in the NIL era now. Players do have a chance to make money off their name, image, and likeness. But one player is not worth the same thing that the top coach is worth. That may not seem fair, and that may not be pleasant to acknowledge, but it is true that when you hire a great coach, he is worth almost whatever money you could pay to get him to come to your job. He has a chance to change the fortune of the program that much. They don't all work out, but when they do, they work out to a really high level. Let me also, I guess, say this real quickly. So Mike Bobo is also out at Auburn. That's a story worth watching. Offensive coordinator gone from there. And, I'll mention this, that Jaden Hazelwood, the former UGA commit, obviously a name we've talked about a gazillion times, he is now in the transfer portal. Don't know what this means. I'd be certainly very curious to see. He's obviously a big-time player, and like a lot of big-time players at Oklahoma now looking for a new home, so we'll certainly file that away, and we'll be paying very, very close attention to that. And for now, we'll make that your SEC see-through. Also here on DawgNation Daily, let me give a couple shout-outs here for a moment. Hope all of you are doing really well on the program today. I told you about our friends at Classic City Lager a little earlier. Don't forget, they're going to be with us this Thursday at Marlowe's in Brookhaven. So if you've been waiting to try some Classic City Lager, here with us at Marlowe's in Brookhaven on Thursday, get a chance to do that. You'll find out what I've been saying. It's a lager-style beer, but there's no sacrifice in flavor. This is a craft-style lager. It's great, great stuff. It's from our friends at Creature Comforts Brewing Company. I love Athens. I love Creature Comforts because it reminds me of Athens, but you don't have to be in Athens to get some Creature Comforts Brewing Company, some Classic City Lager. You can get that with us at Marlowe's in Brookhaven there on Thursday, or wherever you're doing your shopping. It's available in 6 and 12-pack cans. You can pick yourself up some Classic City Lager today, and I know you'll enjoy that. Let me also talk about my friends at Marco's Pizza here for a moment there, too. How about a great deal from them right now? A large bundle of a one-topping pizza, a pizza bowl, cheesy bread, all just $21.99. That's great savings on Marco's Pizza. It's also great flavor there as well. Perfect crust, baked golden brown every time, 3 melted cheeses on top, those old world authentic toppings on top of that there as well. We love the great taste of Marco's Pizza around here, and you will love it there too. Find out that bundle. It includes a large one-topping pizza, pizza bowl, cheesy bread, just $21.99, Marco's app or marcos.com for a lot more on all of that. And as we wrap up here today, one of the things we've done for our Golden Shoe a lot in recent weeks, you've given me your hashtag JD to NYCs. Well, don't forget, as we're getting ready to roll through here, you got your chance right now with the Nissan Heisman House to make your vote for Jordan Davis for the Heisman Trophy. A lot of you have sent this there to me. So we're going to make sure that we push that really hard, and we're going to get JD a little support here towards the end of the season, hopefully against the Alabama Crimson Tide on Saturday. Davis also takes another big step there himself, showing why he is one of the top players in the country. But in honor of our Golden Shoe submissions, which so many of those have been Davis-related there as of late, don't forget to go and do your voting for Jordan Davis. We're going to push that really hard in the days to come. We're going to see if we can get Jordan Davis where he belongs in New York City as a Heisman finalist. That'll be a fun thing to be able to do. Also, Gator Hater Countdown, just 333 days from now. Brand new coach, but same old result. Dogs on top in Jacksonville. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cooldown. We'll take your comments on Facebook, YouTube, and DawgNation.com. The other platforms there as well. And remind you that R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. So make sure you check out R.S. Andrews today. All right. I got Facebook pulled up right here, so let's do some Facebook comments. Matt Rukavina says 10 years from now, a coaching gig will involve an option to run for Senate. Yeah, I mean, look, everything in life, like Pareto's law, the 80-20 principle. The 80-20 principle is really more of a 90-10 or like a 95-5. That in any given situation, a small percentage of people or a small percentage of things are just going to enjoy an outsized level of success. Like the whole Pareto's law thing was based on crops, that somehow, 20% of crops produced 80% of the yield. And everything in life, for the most part, is governed that way. There are a small number of coaches that are just worth more than the other 80% combined. They just are. And luckily, Georgia's got one. And when you don't have one, that's what's expensive. Paying the coaching salaries that are out of whack are like the middle tier coaches. The coaches that aren't taking their program anywhere, but they've got the big salary, they got the big buyout, they got all that kind of stuff. That's the money in the coaching sphere that's wasted. But the guys on the front end, the guys at the top end of all of that, they're pretty clearly worth whatever dollar you could pay them because they return multiples of that back into the program. And that's just the way that life goes. And that level of hierarchy makes some people uncomfortable. But it's just, hierarchies of competency are the things that kind of govern life. And this is an example of that. Let's see what else. Rodney Baxter arguing for Nakobe Dean to maybe be SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Yeah, I'd love that. Tom Luther on the subject of Brian Robinson and his injury status. Yeah, right now it looks like Trey Sanders may be that guy for them. Daniel Aldridge on the subject of Mike Bobo. I don't know what Bobo's future is going to be. Could he do the Will Muschamp thing and be an analyst for Kirby Smart next year? I guess there's a chance that could be the case. Could he look to be getting back involved as an offensive coordinator again somewhere? That could be a case too. But, I think he's going to have a lot of career options. And I think that, I think that just to be completely honest, Bobo should probably be pretty careful about his next choice, right? He went to help out Will Muschamp in the final year of the thing there at South Carolina, and that's a dangerous job to take. I think Bobo probably knew that going in. The Auburn thing, clearly Brian Harsin needed some SEC credentials. That's what Bobo provided. But the fact of the matter is, whether Bobo gets blown out this year or not, Brian Harsin does not seem to be the long-term answer there for Auburn. That's a very poorly kept secret right now. So if he doesn't leave this year, he could have very well, been leaving next year anyway, because Brian Harsin may be leaving next year. Chance Brian Harsin still leaves this year. There had been some talk that if one of those West Coast jobs, now some of those aren't coming available, like Arizona State, if for whatever reason sticking with Herm Edwards, but had they come after Brian Harsin, there had been some rumors that Auburn might waive the buyout. So, Bobo's issue at Auburn was that his head coach doesn't seem to be a long-term answer there at that program. So I'm sure that Bobo was probably just looking for a good cultural fit somewhere with a coach that has the potential of staying around for a while. And if he wants to, bide his time as an analyst, I think he'd be a valuable commodity for UGA. I don't think there's any question that Bobo's a really sharp offensive guy. I don't think there's any question about that. But we'll see. Now, are he and Kirby on the phone a little bit this week, either in an official or unofficial capacity? That wouldn't surprise me. He just played Alabama, so why not find out what he knows? Because I think he knows a pretty good bit. Ryan Walker says Zach Evans in the portal as well. He's been TCU for 2 years, possibly has grown up and has a chance to prove himself and stay out of trouble. Listen, he's shown himself to be a good player at TCU when he's played. As far as like anything off the field, I'm not going to comment on that too much one way or the other. I don't get the sense, though, that Georgia's interested in Zach Evans right now. Listen, I loved Zach, and there was a reason that Georgia went after him. He's a blazing speed guy. That's one of those things that Georgia always needs as much of in the program as it can get. Evans has shown himself at TCU to be a good running back, but I get the impression, at least my hunch on this is, better chance they go after Hazelwood than Zach Evans, if I had to guess. Let's see what else. Duran Willis checking in to say, do we honestly need Hazelwood? I'd rather give younger receivers a chance instead of to come in and make a difference. I understand the point, Duran. I guess I would say that if I had a chance to get Hazelwood, I probably still would want to do it. Because let's think about young receivers there for a moment. If you've got a guy like Hazelwood playing at the top end of his potential ability, the same way that George Pickens could have this year had he been healthy, even though Pickens and Hazelwood are kind of different players, if a guy like that is playing at the top end of his ability, that makes it easier for other receivers. So I think for the most part, you don't see receivers complaining about other good receivers very much because, Georgia's pretty good about getting a bunch of guys in the game, and a successful receiver, I think, makes it possible for more guys to enjoy that success there too. Let's see what else. Let me go over to YouTube there for a moment. Do I have the YouTube pulled up? Apparently I don't. Let me pull up YouTube and get some comments over there. Hope everybody's having a great day. And as I said before, hope you can join us at Marlowe's on Thursday. That's going to be a great time. Brookhaven location. Over here. John Hendrick says, you saw firsthand how quickly a wide receiver room can be depleted. We can use Hazelwood. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that he's coming to Georgia, but, I mean, admittedly, I'd be interested in him if I thought he could. Scott Harris and some of the other Oklahoma players. Yeah, I don't quite know about some of that. CNEOG says, what about Spencer Rattler to South Carolina? Is that a rumor? That's interesting. Now, I also saw this rumor. What about Shane Beamer to Oklahoma as head coach? That rumor's out there right now. That rumor's out there. Now, I don't know if it's going to turn into anything real, but that's a rumor. Yita Cookie says he never really thought Hazelwood was a good fit at Oklahoma. Yeah, I think that, the injury that Hazelwood dealt with, I think probably impacts how well we kind of figure out how well he would have truly fit there at Oklahoma. Andrew Hu says, can we get some Def Leppard played Saturday in the Benz for Jordan Davis? I like that. Robert Barnes says our wide receivers will be just fine. I mean, Robert, there's no doubt that Georgia's looking to add more talent to that position group, though. That's not a secret. Texas Dog says Josh Heupel to Oklahoma for head coach. Yeah, that rumor got going pretty quick, and yet it kind of dissolved pretty quickly there as well. I'm not saying it won't bubble back up, but there are some people who say that Heupel didn't leave Oklahoma on the greatest of terms. Other people who say that, he's at Tennessee with his old boss, Danny White, the athletic director from UCF, is also the guy that hired him at Tennessee. That's a pretty comfortable spot to be in. That, it seemed too perfect that Tennessee might lose another coach after just 1 year, obviously remembering the Lane Kiffin situation from years earlier. But in this particular case, that doesn't quite seem to be happening. In fact, as I said before, there's been more rumors of substance with Shane Beamer, who was an Oklahoma assistant, than there seems to be with Josh Heupel. Now, do any of them become real? I don't know. But right now, Heupel's probably the third on the list of SEC coaches who've been connected. Obviously, Mark Stoops, the other name, is going to come up there. David Jackson says Hazelwood's going to go to USC. He might. Brian McPhail says, is Bob Stoops still the AD at Oklahoma? No, he's not. He's actually just a broadcaster. Joe Castiglione is the athletic director, but Stoops is stepping in as the interim there. And frankly, it has been kind of cool to see, the way in which like the old school Oklahoma guys have kind of rallied around that program. I'm sure if you're a Sooners fan, the presence of Stoops back around there again probably makes you feel pretty good in the midst of what could be a pretty weird situation. Jonathan Moore says, where's Big Bear committed to right now? How about the University of Georgia, Jonathan? Rob D says Heupel went to Oklahoma and coached there. Hold on one second. Went to Oklahoma and coached there. Something's might have happened to where he feels jaded by the university, but he doesn't hate the program. Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't hate the program. I just have heard, and I honestly don't even remember what this was, but apparently he didn't leave on the greatest of terms, at least according to some. Green Soldier says, UJ's leading in yards per play, efficiency, and SEC play, and I believe is now the leader in SEC play for points scored on average. Also, I would take Hazelwood in heartbeat. Yeah, I mean, I've said this a million times. Like in 2019, Georgia was scoring about 21 points per game in SEC play. And I don't really know what the exact number was, but it's about 21 points per game. The way in which Georgia has grown since then is remarkable. It's not even close. Not even close. Let's see what else. Jim McLaughlin says Bob Stoops fired Josh Heupel. Is that true? Is that what happened? Heupel would have been the offensive coordinator for that bowl game against Alabama. Heupel went on, kind of a lost portion of Heupel's career was he was a very good offensive coordinator at Missouri is what I mean to say. He was a very good offensive coordinator at Missouri. DeMarco Thomas about Eric Gilbert. I don't have anything new on that from what we had in the past, which is he's still around the program and, they're hopeful to get him back, but it's not one of those things where it's, very close to happening or anything like that. Mike D asked about the DawgNation cruise. Yes, if you go to DawgNation.com, you can find the link there to book your travel We're leaving from Port Canaveral on April 25th. We're going to Nassau. We're going to Perfect Day Coco Cay on Independence of the Seas. It's going to be an unbelievable time. Unbelievable time. Andrew Hughes on Dan Jackson. His play's been great. Johnny Lester asking about Brent Venables. I know that's another name that's going to been mentioned in the Oklahoma chatter here. And listen, there's all kinds of rumors, and I'm not even going to get into some of that, but the fact that Venables has had the success he's enjoyed at Clemson, their defense is, even with all the injuries, they've had a great defensive year again this year. The fact that he's, been through all of that success as a DC and hasn't become a head coach yet, it's really weird. And everybody's got their reasons for why that's true, but man, that is really weird. David Jackson says, do you think Darnell Washington is happy? I don't have any reason to think that he's not. Paul Moon says the offense is transformed, pretty enticing for a receiver like Hazelwood. Yeah. I mean, I think that if Hazelwood, who absolutely chose not to come to Georgia the first time because he didn't like the offense, if he were to come back second time around, then I think that would be a pretty big statement about how much the offense has grown. I think that's right. Yeah, Green Soldier, Mark Stoops. One way or another, that's a name that could be kind of on the move here. I think you may be right. Scott Harris says the secondary better be ready for Alabama on Saturday. Yeah, and listen, I totally expect Alabama to hit a big play or two. I do. I mentioned before that I think that Georgia wins, but I believe the game is probably close. I think that one of the ways in which Alabama keeps it close is they probably strike on a big play or two. That if you throw it as many times they probably will, then at a certain point you're going to hit on a couple of those. And I think it's important just not to panic too much about that. Yita Cookie says, talking about how the 2019 offense wasn't very good is not fair because we still haven't seen all the plays that James Coley was saving up. That is very funny. And that's one of those things, if you know, remember that era. But that's pretty good stuff. Robert Barnes also predicts a George Pickens return next season. That'd be interesting. I wonder about that. That'd be very interesting. Top Dog says, who scores the first touchdown for the Dogs on Saturday? I'll go with James Cook on that. That seems like a pretty safe answer. Let me go to DawgNation.com. We'll get ready to go. Hope all of you are enjoying it. Good comments as per usual. Getting ready for the big day. All right, over here. Jesse S. says, I'm a bad fan for wanting a close game Saturday. I love a blowout, but close games are more fun. Ooh, boy, I don't know how much of a close game I can take. I'm not sure about that, but it'll be interesting to see how it does play out. Jesse S. also says, do you guys realize the legend status that Stetson's going to achieve if he wins a national title at UGA? They may retire his number. Yeah, listen, he's having a great season right now. Mike Q says, I've heard rumblings about Lanning getting a head coaching job. How likely is that he takes Schumann with him? Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, obviously, Lanning's going to be one of those names that come up. The two coordinators, we mentioned Venables a moment ago, but the two other coordinators that you hear a lot of talk about, Mike Elko, the Texas A&M defensive coordinator, and obviously Dan Lanning in Georgia. By the way, speaking of Texas A&M, makes me remember that we should have also mentioned today's show that Evan Stewart, the five-star wide receiver, committed to Texas A&M yesterday. So a lot of this SEC news we'll end up probably doing on tomorrow's show. But Elko is one of those names that kind of shows up in some of this chatter there as well. Connor Riley.
Quick housekeeping note. Virginia Tech has hired its head coach, Penn State defensive coordinator Brent Pry.
Okay, so one of the interesting things there is that there had been a lot of rumors in the last 12 hours that Bill O'Brien, the Alabama offensive coordinator, who I think Alabama's trying to push out the door, that he might be involved for Virginia Tech. So Brent Pry is not a guy I know a lot about. I won't pretend to. But the interesting thing about the Virginia Tech thing is they were probably racing on Billy Napier, couldn't get there. Obviously Bill O'Brien becomes a fairly easy sell. He was, respected college coach and obviously head coach of the Houston Texans. And so now it's Brent Pry. So if they were able to, I won't even do the stupid pun headline of prying him away from Penn State on that. But that's interesting. That's not a guy that really was on my radar all that much. Trippy Charlie says, which is kind of a funny username, How many sacks the Dogs front seven? Well, Auburn had 7 this past Saturday, so somebody in their comment section yesterday said he thought Georgia would get more than that. Randy Hall says about the early signing day events, there's no telling what we may do on that. A lot of fun stuff coming up. I think we're still trying to figure all that out. Brad Hotnet, that's very funny. Cheston says, I'm not worried about the big school openings taking our assistants. I worry about the small schools, Louisiana-type schools. Our offense is set up to be an absolute monster next year. Monken getting a head coaching job could hurt. Yeah, I mean, totally right about that. That obviously would be a huge coup for Georgia to keep both Dan Lanning and Todd Monken, and maybe Georgia will be able to do that. In the case of Lanning, he's still a pretty young guy. I mean, good for him if he gets that head coaching job, and he may very well get it, but that's still a pretty young guy to be getting promoted to head coach so quickly. In the case of Monken, he's obviously, a little less so. But, I mean, this is just the way it goes. I mean, how many assistants has Nick Saban had to replace over the course of years that if you do well enough, your assistants are clearly going to be a target for other jobs? And this year is no different than any other on that. I understand what you're saying. Like, I'd love to see Georgia hold on to Todd Monken, but that's never an easy thing to do. Rome Dog on the way in which Bennett has grown since the last time he played Alabama as a player. I don't think there's any question about that. Let's see what else. A lot of folks kind of rolling in here. Also more on the Alabama running back injury. We'll follow the Brian Robinson stuff here pretty closely. Richard D says, what are the common scheme of play or lack of execution you have noticed in the second halves of our last few matchups with Alabama? They have led us to giving up a first-half lead. So I think that's a really good question. And on the one hand, I'm probably not smart enough to say that for sure. But here's the one thing I do truly believe, Richard, is that I think people have this thought that, somehow Georgia just, choked these games away or something along those lines. And for the most part, I think that a football game is 60 minutes. Sometimes a team plays better in the first half, sometimes play better in the second half, but ultimately it's about how well you can play for the full 60 minutes. And like the biggest issue that Georgia had against both Alabama 2017, Alabama 2018, they didn't score any points in the second half. That's really the biggest issue. And so in a game like this on Saturday, that's going to matter again. You got to score points in all 4 quarters, something that Georgia just did not do in 2017 or in the rematch in 2018. So that's kind of what it comes down to is, and some people are going to say, well, Kirby Smart got conservative and tried to nurse the lead or something like that. And look, maybe he did. As I said before, I'm not smart enough to even really know that or at least prove that. But if you want a simple statement for how you make second half this time be different than the last time, now I'm not even talking about the 2020 thing because that was just kind of a different animal all the way around. But if you want this time to be different than last time, same venue, by the way, for all 3 of those games, then find a way to score in all 4 quarters, and I think that changes that in a huge way. A huge way. Chip Stewart says, if the Dogs take down Alabama, this will be like the day that Larry Bird and Magic Johnson got schooled by Michael Jordan and begrudgingly acknowledged there was this new sheriff in town. Yeah, you're right about that, that there was this kind of passing of the baton. And the real one for Jordan was probably, although he did beat Magic Johnson in the finals, but the real one for Jordan was probably getting over the hump of the Detroit Pistons. That, Pistons win back-to-back titles in 88 and 89? No, 89 and 90. The final 2 seasons of the 80s. They win those back-to-back titles right there. And that's obviously, Jordan rules era. They're beating up on Michael in those games. And, they're just bullying him. And then, Michael got past that and never looked back. That to me, the perfect NBA comparison is that one, right? Because he had multiple matchups in the playoffs with the Detroit Pistons, who were better than the Celtics at that time. He did beat Magic in his first NBA Finals, but it was really getting over that hump of Detroit. And there are maybe some similarities there. At least as a Georgia fan, you hope that's the case. William Perry says, one thing the Dogs don't do is what you expect them to do, so I wouldn't make any comparison to what happened in the Auburn game. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is just the nature of college football, that week to week, things don't replicate themselves very much. Like, there are 2 teams in the country that play the same each and every week. The best team in the country and the worst team in the country. And pretty much everything else is kind of 1 week they're this way and 1 week they're that way. So Georgia, for the most part, all year long has avoided that gravitational pull back towards the mean. And we'll see if they can also do that there on Saturday. Bright says the second half practice, he means procedure, has been to grind the clock too much when we're up, but is that really a good approach against this Alabama team? No, I think that you've got to stay aggressive offensively, and as I said before, you got to try to find a way to score in all 4 quarters. You do have to do that. I think that's right. All right, final comments, and we're gone. Bill Sanders on the subject of Christian Miller over here. That's a name we're watching pretty closely. Kevin Chapman on the way in which Nick Saban celebrated after beating Auburn last week. That was quite a departure from Saban, no question about that. I felt like I saw the same thing. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming says, I think the Georgia defense is going to get at least 2 picks on Saturday. Boy, that'd be huge, huge. That'd be huge. Gerald Harmon on the subject of Scottie Pippen. That's very funny. Let's see what else over here on YouTube to finish things off. Brandon Wells says, how about Ladd McConkey scoring the first touchdown? That'd be fun. Red Clay between the toes, looking ahead to 2022 a little bit with the quarterback spot. Yeah, there's going to be a big offseason story for sure. Foster Moss says Nick Saban sounds defeated in that press conference. I'm telling you, a lot of the audio that's coming out of Saban right now, very different what you're used to hearing. JP's got a 53-10. That'd be quite a score. Jeremy shouts out BA. I have a feeling I know what Jeremy's talking about. Yeah, there you go. Paul Moon, the subject of Buster Faulkner. Yeah, don't forget about the role that Faulkner plays for this team. I think it's a pretty important one. Frank Patterson says, who would you want more, Zach Evans, Jaden Hazelwood, or Reed Gilbert? Well, over the course of the years, I've wanted them all. And if we assume for a moment that Georgia has Gilbert and you give me the choice between Hazelwood and Evans right now, I'll choose Hazelwood at the moment. I will. All right, we got to go. Fun stuff. Thanks for being here for R.S. Andrews Cooldown. And of course, make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. They will take care of you on all of that. Also, make sure you check out my friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. Of course, it's Atlanta mayoral election runoff day. So if you live in the city of Atlanta, that's worth following. Or if you're just curious about how it plays out, ajc.com for more on that. Also, Jahmyr Gibbs, Georgia Tech running back in the transfer portal. Interesting stuff on that. Obviously, Jahmyr was a great player at Dalton High School, and really, for a terrible Tech team, Jahmyr had a really good season. So there's going to be a lot of interest in Gibbs as a transfer running back. More on the AJC on that there, too. And some holiday date night ideas. A lot of us need that date night with our significant other. The AJC's got some help for you on that, too. So Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com. Check that out. Big thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cooldown possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. They show up on time, do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online today at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. We'll look forward to speaking to you then, everybody.